Podcasters Roundtable, round 50. Congrats to the Roundtable. That's a milestone in podcasting, right? I mean, they're just numbers, but you got to have something to count. So 50 on the back of broadcasting live from the show floor at New Media Expo /NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters. There with Daniel running the boards and, of course, co-hosting duties, making him do extra work. But he's always handling the chat, so you didn't have a chat to handle this time. We had a live audience, so really cool. That episode that round is on the site, so podcastersroundtable.com/49. Go listen to that. The audio sounds great, and it's so much fun to have that background noise of the conference with the live crowd. And you know what? I think we might have turned out one of the biggest crowds. Again, I'm going to say we had the biggest crowd. Okay, so biggest crowd at NMX for the Podcast Alley. I was going to give Dave his congratulations, but Dave is having some computer issues, so you'll see him hopefully on and off. Hopefully next time he's on, he will stay on. But today we are talking about rebranding your podcast, but we'll dive into more of what that means after, of course, we meet the Roundtable. So the aforementioned Daniel J. Lewis, welcome back. It was great to see you in Vegas.
Thank you. I'm now rebranding myself as Leonid Sewell instead of Daniel J. Lewis. I'm tired of the Daniel J. Lewis jokes.
All right. Well, give us maybe a round or two to catch up to that one, or maybe 100. Well, welcome back. Again, thanks again for the help in Vegas, and you did a bunch of live broadcasting from there, right? How was it for you?
Oh, Vegas was a lot of fun. I actually didn't get to spend much time in New Media Expo, but I spent a lot of time on the NAB floor, a lot of time talking to people who were there for NMX. And it was a great event, some really cool technology, some awesome people there, and great opportunities doing some live streaming for several shows.
Yeah, a bit overwhelming. I didn't get to spend half of the amount of time that I wanted to on the NAB floor, nor did I get to meet half the people that were actually there that I wanted to meet. So that's probably another discussion for a different round, like how to be more effective, although we don't do how to, but we did our conferences worth it. That was the last time. So that was our second time doing live from the New Media show, or New Media, sorry, that's a podcast, the New Media Expo show floor. Dave Jackson, welcome back to the Roundtable. Congrats, buddy, on getting through the New Media Expo. Dave was the director of podcasting for NMX, and he is alive to tell the tale.
Yeah, I'm back. I wanted to cry today. I was listening to, the round when you guys were like, Dave Jackson, and I'm like, I was waiting out front for Chris Jericho going, I'm missing the Roundtable, man.
That's not a good exchange.
Yeah, it's not. No, not at all. No.
Roundtable greater than Chris Jericho, in my opinion. I'm saying.
Yeah, that was my thought. But
bring it, Jericho. Bring it. If that's a problem, you can join. He's a podcaster. He can come on here. All right. Anyways, new Roundtabler, yet probably friend of the show, Joshua. Welcome. Here's your first Roundtable, correct?
Yeah, I was waiting for a big number to be able to make my first appearance. So. Yeah, my name is Josh Rivers, and so I have several different podcasts, and so the one that we'll be talking about today, because of the topic, is the Success Road podcast.
Cool, yeah, I was like, this is your first one, because I think I was just on your show, one of your shows, so it seems like we just talked, because we did. Jason Bryant, who we saw at NMX, he was there at the Roundtable, so that was cool. Lots of Roundtablers at NMX got to be in person. That was so cool. So hopefully we can see you at one of the next ones. Dave will still be organizing that show, and maybe Podcast Alley be a little bigger next time. Maybe Dave will show up. But Jason in the chat room says, can someone, for the love of all that is podcasting holy, get Dave Jackson a MacBook? So Dave, when we are, maybe right round 100, we'll have blown up and we will be buying MacBooks for the Roundtable. But each guest gets a new MacBook. This is not Oprah. No, it's not going to happen. All right, returning Roundtabler on the end. Kenn, welcome back.
Hey, man. Glad to have you. Glad to be on the show, and glad to see you guys again.
Yeah, no, it's been a while. I think I just looked up the round that you were on, and it was a while ago. I think it was a podcasting pet peeve. I'd have to look it up again. But yeah, welcome back.
Crossing Delaware and stuff.
There you go.
Just way back in the day.
Way back in the day. We go way back here on the Roundtable. That's good. We are 50 rounds in, and this is a bi-weekly show. That's quite a bit. Normally, that would almost be a year of podcasting, right? But we're probably around 2 years. We weren't quite consistent in the beginning. All right. I don't know where Dave went. He's a black box, but if we crash, we can just go to Dave and find out what's inside of the Roundtable. All right. Let's jump into rebranding your podcast. And I will say, let's see here. In my description, let me just go from that, because it says, have you ever changed the name of your podcast? That's usually I'm trying to get people to just respond to the question, right? But maybe you've changed the name, content, your Twitter handle, or any other established element that makes up a podcast, right? So perhaps the shift has even been more subtle, like you've just changed your artwork or your colors or a total website rebrand. But the question is, when do you know it's time for a change? So a couple of our roundtablers here tonight have gone through whatever it is you want to call rebranding. And I think, gosh, we had someone in the chat. I think it was Alicia. Alicia Scott says she is rebranding right now, but she actually wants to know, she says, what I would like to know is a clear definition of podcasting, if there is one. That's sort of related to the talk I gave at NMX, which is how to pitch a podcast to your boss. One of the first things you may have to do is explain what is a podcast. There are a lot of definitions. Of course, there is a really geeky, hardcore definition that involves PDF and EPUB and all the formats you can be. It's got to be episodic. It's an RSS feed. But a lot of times we say internet, TV, or radio. I'm not sure. Why do you think, Daniel, why do you think maybe she's asking for a definition of a podcast when she's talking about a rebrand? Any thoughts?
Maybe just to get all on the same page, but at the same time, I do see, I'm not sure if she's actually asking this question, but I do see a rebranding question in this. You have a podcast, and maybe you call it such and such podcast, and that's part of the title. What do you do if a TV station comes to you and says, we want to make a TV show out of your podcast, or a radio station, or a book, or you decide to turn the podcast into a business? Then you're stuck with this rebranding thing of how can you carry the name over but yet not describe the media that you're using? I think podcast and podcasting can be part of rebranding.
Yeah, I think in the beginning a lot of us had so-and-so podcast. It was always whatever podcast, right? Did you have that? I'm trying to think. Well, I had Produce Picker podcast, and that never changed because really it pod faded before that we didn't have to bother with it. Now everything's just sort of a show.
Well, with the exception of the Audacity to Podcast, which technically, if you want to include the media label, it would be the Audacity to Podcast. Right. And some people have been smart enough to actually call it that sometimes. To label it that way. But my more recent one, it's my most recent show that does actually have podcast baked into the common title for that, and that is Once Podcast, or Once Upon a Time Podcast. But the full name is much longer than that, but everyone knows it as Once Podcast. And our Clean Comedy Podcast, which I'll talk more about that branding later, but we now use the domain Clean Comedy Podcast, which that's starting to grate on me a little bit because I'm realizing I've put myself in a box calling it a podcast.
Right. A lot of a lot of this media that we might be creating. Oh, Dave's coming in. I got two Daves. I got feedback. Yeah. I think he's coming in from a phone.
I'm coming in on my iPad.
All right. Get some headphones.
While I reboot my other machine.
I actually suggested that. I didn't know you had an iPad. So welcome back. Welcome back, Double Dave. All right. So anyways, a lot of the media or the content we produce can live outside. You may be doing a video show that can be sent to YouTube, and at that point, it's not really a podcast, right? So, Kenn, I think this whole topic of rebranding actually is inspired by you. I think that a long time ago, you pitched this idea because you've gone through a total rebrand from what I understand, correct?
Yeah, when I first started, I was the Urban Shooter Podcast. And the Urban Shooter Podcast was about firearms and the gun community and gun rights and a whole bunch of good stuff. And as podcasting grew, so did I. I wanted to do more stuff. and I kind of snuck away from the whole gun world, and I started grabbing a whole bunch of weird pieces. I mean, I had like zombie stories, and I had comedians, and I was just pulling everything that was me into the show, and I was wondering if I was messing stuff up, and that I was breaking some kind of rule. And then over the last 7 years, I realized pretty much you can make the rules up as we go. And somewhere around a couple years ago, I decided to what I called rebranding, which was change the name to what everybody called me, what my books was titled by, what the website was, just kind of focused, specialized on not just the urban shooter, but black man with a gun. And that name has been around the world a couple of times. So I decided to just stick with that. And then in the last 2 years, I'm kind of like looking at this whole branding word, and I think what I really did was remodel my podcast. Actually, I didn't brand or rebrand until I changed from the Black Man with a Gun show to a whole different show which covers hunting and fishing and gun rights. So when it became the Blanchard Outdoors, then it was really a rebrand, because now it's actually an internet radio show and a podcast, and I got 2 other hosts. It just totally changed. So I think our terms are kind of muddled, and I'm still figuring it out myself.
Yeah, I mean, it's strange. So you did have podcast in the title there, and then was there some consideration of going to show over podcast?
Yeah, I mean, because gun show is like a common phrase. So I went to Black Man with the Gun show, and that was fine until, and all my stuff was based on monetization. From the very beginning, I was trying to figure out how to make money with this thing, and I wasn't doing it. And then I started listening to stuff like Dave said. He was talking to musicians, and musicians are broke. And I was thinking, all right, my avatar is not necessarily in the industry. They are activists. They are lovers of firearms and recreational shooting and hunting. But the money wasn't really there. The people who make the money in that are the legislators and the gun rights community. The NRA, for example, makes all the cash there. Talking about it didn't do anything, but the hunting, fishing world, that was money. And as soon as I changed my brand and my whole focus to that market, then everything that I've been doing before became like my trust platform, and things changed.
So did you take the audience that you had and just sort of push them into this new rebrand, meaning that you had a podcast, it had a good following. Did you start a new show, or did you create it in that same RSS feed?
Total new show. Talked about it for about a month straight, and maybe only grabbed, I don't know, maybe 20 people came over. Almost my whole audience is new, which was totally scary. And
what did you do with the old audience?
I tried to leave them. I tried to like cut and run.
I don't.
Like,
I'm out of here. Like,
I don't want to do it anymore. I'm
you
tired
didn't
of
even
this.
say this is my. Did you say this is the last episode, or you just?
I think I did.
What, are you scared of all those guns that are going to come after you?
I kind of weaned them all down, and all of a sudden, there was this quiet moment where they said, "No, we're not going anywhere." So my numbers didn't drop, and I was trying to. I changed the format. Like, I had my show was an hour. I made it like a half hour. I added a couple of other writers and invited some more people to come on, and the show picked back up. It became this new entity, which I don't have to work as hard. So I don't think that'll happen to anybody else, but just, Forrest Gump and me luck.
They had to they had to pry your podcast from their dead cold hands. I couldn't resist. I'm bad at cheesy jokes. Daniel, what is hearing this experience? What are your first thoughts? I mean, like, cut and run. See ya.
I'm a fan of announcing things. Otherwise, it will seem like either you just got lazy and forgot about it and let it slide, or it just leaves people hanging, wondering, is there going to be more? Should I stay subscribed?
You have to. Oh, go ahead, Ken.
I did. I told them for probably like 3 or 4 months. Every show was, I'm thinking about doing this new thing. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do this thing. What do you think? And I would post it on my Facebook page. I'd send out emails to my list, and it it stayed consistent. The folks were like, "Go ahead and do what you got to do," but
Yeah.
but they didn't leave. It was just the strangest thing. So when I found out that they weren't gone, it was funny. My wife says, "I thought you were like decreasing your podcast." No, I have to stay because my audience wants me. They're like wouldn't let me go. So it's a weird thing.
Cool. Now, Daniel, you sent into there's a private chat. Anytime you're doing a Hangout, Google Hangout on air, there's a chat that only the people on the roundtable can see. The new roundtablers, if you don't know that, it's up there. It's a little indication of maybe a 1 or 2 up there. You can talk to each other. So Daniel does a great job of monitoring the chat room. The chat room usually rocks. It's pretty busy, but you have a question from Craig that is related to this name change, right?
Yeah, Craig asked, this is from Craig Wieland. He said, how does changing the name of your podcast, even a word or two of it, affect ratings in iTunes?
Craig Whelan also came over, right, across the pond to NMX, and we met him live. That was really cool. So what do we think? How does changing the name of your podcast? Dave, are you in here? Can you? Is Dave live? Dave, this is just like being an NMX. So just calling
breathing.
out Dave. I'm calling out.
He blinked.
He blinked. He may not. He's muted. He might have us muted too. But anyways, all right. So who wants to tackle this? Daniel, you're good with the tech when it comes down to what's going on inside of iTunes. What do we
Well, I
think?
think some cool things, kind of like what Kenn did, is he changed the title, and that made his podcast more searchable for that phrase, gun show, which is something that people would search for. So that was pretty genius, naming it something like that. When you change that title, it will take some time for Google and other search engines and iTunes and such to update both their listing and their indexing of you. But changing that title could help you be found better. It could hurt you depending on how you change the title, but it's not going to change your ratings, or I think he really means your rankings, where you are in the list, because that's affected by how many new people subscribe, ratings, reviews, downloads, all of that stuff. Yes, that may increase or decrease for new people coming in, depending on how findable and how a new title is. But just the nature of changing the title technically won't hurt your rankings or in any way.
Yeah, and again, we're talking about switching the name of name of your show. That's the same feed, right? Nothing has changed. You're literally just switching the name. Okay, if you do that in your feed, in your title that goes to iTunes, we heard from Rob Walsh of Lipson, who's a friend of the show. He's a roundtabler. Good talk out at NMX. In fact, if you go to the Podcaster Roundtable, or you just get in touch, we can give you a link to the PDF that he had. It's full of a lot of good stuff. I'm hoping he'll post the audio. I thought I'd heard everything Rob had to say because I listened to his shows and I talked to him. But he had great stuff, and he talks about this sort of iTunes. And Daniel, you do an SEO for iTunes, so there's a lot of information about it. But yeah, it's not going to affect your ranking or any kind of juice that you've had. Now, you could be less searchable, like Daniel says, but your ranking is based on all-time subscribers. And we do know that, as well as ratings and reviews and stuff like that, but we do know that the title is the number one thing that iTunes is going to look at for search, right? As you mentioned, and really only 2 things, well, maybe 3: title of your show, titles in your episodes, and your author tag, right? Mm-hmm. So if you do change that title, then yes, I think the key there is that you are going to be found for different terms. And that could be good or bad.
Kenn, how did it affect you when you changed the title of your shows?
I took a big dip and didn't know why, but then it came back with a vengeance because I've been the black man with a gun longer than anything. I mean, that's I had a website up since 1999, so it was my fault not being focused from the beginning. That was my issue. I didn't know the power of my title. I didn't understand SEO at all. I mean, I just been throwing Jello at the wall forever, and doing stuff. So it's my fault that everything is like it is.
You know, that makes me think of something that could be a consequence. If you change the title and you change the cover art, depending on the podcast app someone is using, that could create a new podcast, or it could rebrand the podcast in their list of subscriptions, which could confuse them. Mm-hmm. Like they might look at their list and think, what's this? I don't remember subscribing to this podcast, and they might unsubscribe, or they might be less inclined to catch up with that one.
Okay, so during a rebrand of that type, then what's important there so that doesn't happen?
Communication is huge. You really got to talk to your people. The survey thing is paramount with everything. You can't leave your crowd behind. Have them. That's how I got to the hunting show. I asked probably 2 months, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? And a few people said, we don't have this. And I thought, yeah, I don't want to go there. And I had to get myself in line to be the leader. It was kind of a weird thing, but it's working.
So I wanted to bring in Fred Castaneda's comment in the lead up to this round, and there's always an event page, and you can submit comments there. And also, call to action, go to podcastersroundtable.com, get on the list so we know you're out there. So 2 ways I know you're out there. If you're commenting on a particular round and you're leaving feedback to share your experience, then I may just drag you in from that because I'm like, oh, there's a lot of experience here that I did not know about. Other way is to get on the list at podcastersroundtable.com, and you can submit the things you want to talk about. So Fred, leading up to this, we talked about, Ken, you said you're just kind of throwing Jell-O at the wall. You weren't quite prepared. You just kind of did this thing. A lot of podcasters do that. We get excited, right? We may not be necessarily in it for money or business or anything like that. We just want a podcast. And Fred says that, let me see if I can cut this down a little bit, but he says, he considers it like pivoting. All his current 8 shows and the other 8 that I pod faded since 2006 have been so narrowly targeted to a niche audience. He's had target focused audience that he does. Oh, so targeted focused. He says he doesn't have to rebrand. They were set up so that the logical exit strategy was to pod fade. He said, therefore, he didn't have to go through the exercise or effort of rebranding. Now, it really sounds like a negative term here, and I think we could probably talk about, is rebranding necessarily negative, right? But he says, this doesn't mean that there's no longevity to my podcast shows. Case in point, Struggling Entrepreneur has a lot of episodes. But he says, the alternative to rebranding is planning your podcast exit strategy, where rebranding is not needed. As your discussion tonight will probably reveal, that some podcasters started their podcast with passion and not enough planning by thinking through the exit strategy that would make sense for them. Any thoughts? I mean, we talked about, planning ahead of time. He's talking about not having to rebrand, and I don't know that I think that might be a valid point that you just might not think that much about it when you start.
And that's something that sometimes when I hear podcasters, there have been a couple that I've subscribed to that have gone through a rebrand, and I won't say who they are because I'm about to criticize them. But I felt like their rebrand was unnecessary, or that they should have thought better when they started out. And some of them were early on, and they were a few episodes in, and then they rebranded. And it should have either been thought out better how they're going to start, or maybe just stop one show and start a brand new show under the new branding. It's messy, and it doesn't mean you have to plan perfectly, though. But I think all of us at some point might realize maybe a different brand is better for me.
Dave, are you back in the game?
I think so. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, barely hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you a little bit.
You can turn me up.
There you go. Hey, so you've been listening in, maybe. I think you've been just trying to get back on.
I could only hear Ken. That was the weirdest part. That's all I could hear.
Well, what do you think here? I mean, let's talk about the idea of, here's the thing. I rebel a little bit when I hear about excessive planning ahead, thinking about the strategy of my podcast, how it's going to end. Like, sorry, man, I just want to start a podcast. And I think that a lot of our community is how they got involved. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with going into a podcast with a strategic plan. Right. I think that's more common these days. But, in the beginning, when Fred started his 28 shows or whatever he had, because he's hardcore, he does so many shows, he just started. He had a very good plan. But in the beginning, man, a lot of us are just launching shows. Dave, what do you think about?
Well, my wife, believe it or not, my wife wants to get back into podcasting. She had weight loss surgery.
The hammer.
Yeah, and wants to share her story. And that's about as much planning as we put into it, and she's ready to go. And so I always use the little story of a guided missile, because a guided missile, heads towards its target, and the reason it's guided is somebody goes, hey, you need to go a little bit to the left, and goes, all right, cool, and then it adjusts, and somebody goes, oh, you know what, really, actually a little more to the right. So 98% of the flight of a guided missile, it's wrong. It's technically wrong. It's off target, but it adjusts at the very end, and it blows up its target, and we all clap and applaud, and everything is cool. It's the best guided missile ever. No, but yet it was wrong most of the time. So it's that little tweaking, I think, that gets us, on target. But yeah, I understand Daniel's point. If I start off and I'm doing the, waffle and bacon podcast, and I change it to the NASCAR podcast or, Grandma's knitting podcast, I might want to go, what were you thinking when you started? But yeah, so I don't think there's anything negative. I mean, I started off, I had the Musician Cyber Cooler, which changed to the Musician's Cooler, which is now the Marketing Musician Podcast, because I just got tired of explaining what the heck the name meant. And that's where I'm like, yeah, I think obvious is better than, the Musician Cyber Cooler. Back in the day, cyber meant sex, usually. That was followed by that word. And then I went to Musician's Cooler, and everybody thought it was a wine cooler. And I'm like, no, it's a water cooler. We're all trained. Okay, never mind. Marketing Musician it is. So, yeah, sometimes you just, and that's where I always say now, ask your audience, or your intended audience, I'm starting a podcast named blank. What do you think it's about? And if they say, I bet it's about this, and they're right, that's a pretty good name.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. And if you're not trying to monetize and you're just sharing, then don't sweat it. Just go for it. Just do your thing. We get caught up in diversification, trying to please everybody, and then we get lost because we forgot where we were supposed to go in the first place. That's like the biggest thing. Just do you.
So Josh, let's get you jumping in here. What was your rebrand? What did rebranding mean for your show?
Well, I was kind of feeling bad about how my rebranding went until I heard Kenn's story, so I don't feel quite so bad. So maybe it's a little more common than what I was thinking. But the podcast I had was my very first original podcast. I started back in February 2013. I called it the Quality Living Made Simple podcast. A little bit of a mouthful, but it seemed to. I put a little survey out, and that's kind of what came out as a suggestion that we should do it. So that's what I went with. And so everything was quality made simple, quality living made simple. And so, I mean, the email address was, the name of the podcast, the artwork, excuse me, everything. And the basic idea that I was going with is that trying to get a better quality of life by implementing simple things into our daily life and not complicating things. And so that was kind of my thinking going into it originally. And so I went through that for a while, and then after about a year and a half, I got a comment from someone, a friend, saying that he was looking at my podcast, and as he was listening, or as he was looking at the name of it, he was thinking that it meant something else, more like a home improvement type of show, which it isn't. And so this only got me thinking, and I'm the kind of person, I like to make changes even when it's not absolutely necessary. And so my website can be great, and I can just go in and make some changes because I like to see something different. And so I'm like, okay, well, let me go and see what I can do with this. And so I did put a little bit of a survey out. By the time I did that, I think it was November 2014, and I put a little survey out for my audience. I was getting close to 400 or so regularly, and as I was getting this out, I was only getting a couple people responding to it. And so I didn't know exactly what that meant as far as where is it just downloads but people not actually listening, or people just not wanting to respond, or I didn't know exactly what it meant. And so anyway, so I kind of took what little feedback I had, and I kind of looked at myself inward as well, as far as, okay, well, what message am I trying to get across, or how can I redirect what I was talking about. And so Success Road is the eventual name that I came to, because I wanted to talk about success, and then the fact that success isn't a destination. It's not something that we reach, and then once we reach it, we're done. It's something that it's a journey. It's something that we just keep on going down the road, and we just have these pit stops along the way. And so that's kind of the idea of what happened through my rebrand. Now, how I approached it, my plan was I was faced with the two basic ideas of, let me try to change everything over and try to retain my audience, or do I just stop this one, start the new one, and try to direct everybody over? And so I'm like, well, I don't know if I want to start completely over. Let me try to see if I can keep my audience. So I'm trying to change my domain name, my feed, changing my artwork, changing all that over. And so I was doing the 301 redirects, I did some research to try to see what I needed to do to try to make iTunes happy and all that kind of stuff so that the feed would go over. And so I was doing all that somewhere December, January, and it seemed like it was going okay as far as everything was getting directed over. But I only got maybe about 20% of my audience that came over, so went from about 400 down to about 60. And so I'm like, okay, well, maybe this is what my real audience is. I'm not sure. And so I just kind of took that as it was. Well, maybe people are just slow kind of getting over or are readjusting. And then a little bit later, I think I read somewhere that it says that you need to keep the redirect on for like 6 weeks or so. And so I did that, and then I wanted to bring the other one back so I can bring the past episodes, because I was going to kind of have like a semi-clean break with the episodes. And so I don't know, it's a little crazy my thinking sometimes. And so I was going to have my new episodes be with the new podcast, the new rebranding, and then the older episodes keep on the other one. That way I can kind of retain all the SEO and whatever that those have already acquired. And then I was going to bring a podcast feed for that to kind of maybe bring some extra traffic in through that. So it was really crazy. I didn't really think through the whole thing. And for me, in my situation, I probably should have just started a brand new one and tried to direct people over and just started that way. It probably would have been a lot more simple.
So Crystal, before in the lead up, she talks about she said, don't forget the technical implications of rebranding, which, I mean, you lost me. There's like a ton of technical implications inside of your story there. So as you're hearing this, Daniel, here's one. Technical, Crystal talks about the artwork. Says, do you only update going forward, or are you going to update all your episode thumbnails? And I think that a lot of podcasters change at a minimum their artwork at some point. Maybe a lot, not all of them. I certainly am not going to go back and put in old, artwork into old i3 tags or anything like that, right? So what are some of the other technical implications? You guys, Dave, Kenn, Daniel, any of them, when you heard this story, what do you think would have been best for Josh to have done? So he's trying to let's take the example that he's trying to retain his audience.
Mm-hmm. 301 redirects. I think that's the main thing. There are people who will say, oh, just put this iTunes tag in. And yes, that's nice. And you can do that as an extra thing. That kind of helps iTunes process faster. You would want that it's iTunes : new feed URL, that tag. That would be great to be on the final destination feed, because that just tells iTunes, even if you're placing a 301 redirect, that tells iTunes, yes, this is definitely switched. Make this change happen almost immediately. But a 301 redirect on your feed, if you change feed URLs on your website, domain, and every single link on your website, every single link you have ever given out needs to 301 redirect over to the appropriate place on your new site, I think. And that really handles most of it. Cover art and such. If you're going to make something that will make people not recognize the podcast after your rebranding, I would say make sure you tell people ahead of time that it's coming, kind of like Kenn was doing. Mm. The one thing, though, I don't think you need to worry about is your feed URL. Yeah, it might have your old name in the feed URL, but if trying to figure out how to transition your RSS feed and all of that, if that scares you, don't worry about it. Just keep that old domain always working, or that old URL. It doesn't mean you have to have your feed URL match the name of your podcast, because people don't really see that URL. It doesn't really matter that much what it actually is.
He's right. I didn't change mine. Mine still says Urban Shooter at Libsyn. So.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard this debate in the sort of podcast circles about branding in your feed and where that lives, right? If it lives on your host, that may be a third-party host, or it lives from your own website. I've never really understood. I'm like, who sees this address? It's not really a big branding issue as far as I'm concerned. Maybe there is some sort of IP thoughts, right? If it's a third-party URL versus your own, but at the end, it's still going to have, at some point, it's still going to have your brand in it. But again, yeah, you're not really going to see that name. So, Dave, what are you thinking? Have you done, Dave, any kind of rebrand, and what technical implications of doing something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. I usually start, and this is where I get a little blurry. I think and when you do the iTunes thing, the question is, what happens to the people who've already subscribed? And I guess that's where a 301 is actually, it just fixes it. If you're subscribed to the old feed, when you hit it, boom, it redirects you over here. And I'm not even sure if the iTunes new feed URL addresses that, or does it address the new people? I know it addresses it going forward. I'm not sure what the iTunes redirect actually does to the old subscribers, if it updates everybody or how that goes. But yeah, when I found out about 301 redirects, and I forget the name of the plugin, it's something like, I don't know, 301 redirect. It's really easy. And you just go in and say, here's the address of what I want redirected, and it says, okay, where do you want it to go? And I was like, that's when I went, wow, that's a whole lot easier than dealing with the whole, you're waiting for iTunes to come up and check it and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you just, whatever, the obvious, whatever you're redirecting it to, make sure it's ready. Make sure the iTunes tags are there and the artwork and the episodes. My favorite, people try to redirect it to something that they haven't put the old episodes. If you're keeping the old episodes there, make sure there's something there when people go there. So
I was listening to, I don't know, maybe it was The Feed or something. One of you guys may have heard this recently, and they were talking about, this would be Crystal, they were talking about it was 5x5. It was Dan Benjamin, because he was saying he was talking about the GUID,
yeah.
He was calling it the GUID. I was like, is that a character in The Hobbit? I didn't know what the GUID was. Daniel, did you hear that? He's talking about if you keep that the same, then it's not going to make people sort of re-download all those episodes, right?
Right, and that's an individual episode issue, not like your feed overall. So if your rebrand is that you change your domain, you change the naming in WordPress, and you maybe go into the database and whatever, you change your domain and names, but it's all the same database, the same website, just named something differently. You don't have to worry about the GUIDs. But if you're doing something like splitting one podcast off your site into its own site, that's when you have to worry about the GUIDs. If you're going from one RSS hosting provider to another, that's when you need to worry about the GUIDs. People like Libsyn, if you transfer your RSS feed to them, they can maintain it. But that GUID, there's one for every item in your feed. And so if you're changing the overall structure of your feed or what is generating that feed, that's when you need to be most concerned about accidentally forcing a download on everyone.
And we can clear up Dave's question about the iTunes affecting it's going to take the subscribers, right? And it's going to say, hey, you guys, and they're not going to know, but now it's going to point them to the new feed.
That's what I thought.
I'll give a Dave Jackson style illustration here.
I smell an analogy.
A 301 redirect is kind of like a forward of address notice that you place. The old house might still exist, but you're telling people, okay, forward my mail here, and at the same time that you forward my mail, also notify the sender that I've changed addresses. That's what a 301 redirect does. The iTunes new feed URL only works for iTunes and some other podcast clients. But what it does is it's like someone bringing the mail to your house, and here comes Mr. iTunes new feed URL, and he says, no, dummy, the place is over here. Here, let me take you there right now, and don't you ever go look at this other place. This is the new place right now. That's what new feed URL is basically doing.
Wow. And he's mean. That is a mean tag. It's the meanest RSS tag I've ever heard in my life. Let's see. Rob Greenlee chimed in. I don't know what he said, but he says you need to add the iTunes new feed tag first to your existing feed, then a few days later do the 301 redirect in that order.
Actually, I disagree with that.
All right. Roundtable style.
I say do the 301 redirect first and put the iTunes new feed tag in that final destination feed. You wouldn't put it in your source feed if that source feed is just redirecting to somewhere else.
Daniel, I know you must have an episode on this that you can cross-promote.
Yeah, I think it's that episode 97 that like you send everybody to. It's just the answer to life, universe, and RSS feeds. And
like here's the thing. So audacitytopodcast.com, probably /97. You can do a search. Hit up Daniel if you're curious. Daniel get a lot of email because here's the thing. Like podcaster, Dave's confused. I can be confused. Daniel's questioning things that Rob Greenlee is saying. I mean, like, this stuff is not easy, right? So we're talking about the technical aspects of rebranding. And one more, like, what about, I think we've kind of talked, have we really dealt with, I have a show. I know you want to keep your 400, 4,000 subscribers, but I want to change, I'm just going to change everything that's going into that feed. We're now a video show called something else and looks completely different, right? I mean, have we talked about that? Almost no.
That's a real rebrand there.
When is it time? I don't know. Can you guys imagine a case where here's the thing, Podcast Quick Tips is a very short format show that I have that is, I'll say it's on hiatus. It could have pod faded, but it could come back. It's got a nice library. It does fine on its own. Maybe that'll be a video show at one point. And you know what? Videos might just show up in that feed one day. I mean, what do you guys think about that? When is it time to... Here's the thing. I will say that the show doesn't perform as well as... It didn't have the pickup that I thought it might have, considering I have an audience, the same audience, on another long format show called The Podcaster Studio. I didn't see a lot of those people migrate over. So something's happening there. It could just be the short format, right? Which podcasts tend to do better in long, I think. But video does better in short. So I don't know. What do you guys think about?
I would just in that case, it sounds like what Ken did. No, just let everybody know, hey, here's what's happening as of this date. I'm going to start sending videos down here. Would love your feedback. Go from there. That would be it. And then you let the chips where they... And if you don't like video, then follow me over here at thepodcastersroundtable.com or wherever you want them to go. That give them an alternative. That way, one of the alternatives is not quit listening to me. It's you can go here or here. Which one would you like?
Yeah, it's nice. Mark Deal in the chat said, going through this as well, change logo, change intro to more clearly call out the ideal listener, and now adding a blog and G Plus Hangouts to the mix. So as I often say, grow as you go. You may find out your audience wants something different. I think I used the example, Dave, I think it was on your show one time, School of Podcasting, where you talked about someone who had, I've mentioned this before, they were doing a podcast of like 3 different things in one show, and it was like, you know, on one segment we talk about leprechauns, and the next segment we talk about like books I love, right? And then the audience at some point said, stop doing the leprechaun stuff. I just want to hear about the books.
I was like that.
Yeah, okay. So talk about that a little bit, Ken. I mean, you did,
Ken.
but it might have been Ken.
The problem was me. I had in my attempt to just try what works, I was doing my Orson Welles thing, and I had a writer who was giving me a story, one chapter every week, and I was narrating this story about zombies. It had nothing to do with guns, except for every once in a while he would talk about a cool gun, and I'd describe it, you know, ad nauseum. But there was a part of my audience that said, "We love Zombie Strike," and the other part said, "Man, I hate that zombie stuff." And when the thing ended at the 200th episode, I let it go, and it didn't bring it back. But I still hear people who say, "Man, I love that zombie stuff. That's what got me listening to you." So it's just you have to make a decision yourself. I got like my own little 5 little steps I just kind of pulled up. You got to talk to your people. That's one. You got to measure and actually do some research on what they're looking for. Rethink your avatar. You might think you're talking to gun owners when you actually have a sci-fi crew that's more passionate than you think. And then you got to make a plan on how you're going to deal with it. And then the other part of it is you got to communicate that vision If you're going to change, become a video, become a radio thing, you got to do it without. You can't do it by yourself. You're going to have to communicate that thing and let it go. If they say no, then you got to make a choice: stay or go.
And I would add to that, add why. Because if your audience is adults, they're going to want to go, why are you doing this? Because in general, human beings do not like change. So, but when you can say, here's how you're going to benefit, because I'll be able to show you this stuff now instead of tell you, and they're going to be short videos, they won't eat up your bandwidth, things like that. When you can explain to people here's how you're going to benefit, hopefully they won't complain as much.
We are still going through this with my Clean Comedy podcast. It's been an audio show for the first 200 episodes. We did one video episode in there for an anniversary. But in episode 200, we announced we're going to go seasonal and we're going to go video. And I made the decision to keep that in the RSS feed because the video show would be replacing the audio show. And we were kind of already shifting direction toward more visual stuff that we would have to describe or tell people visit the show notes to see what we're talking about, that kind of thing. Still trying to reach the audio people, but we realized just our minds were going more visual. And so we wanted to shift to video, and we're going to do that on the same podcast channel. Now, though, with an out-of-state move that I have coming up, that really throws a wrench into things. So I don't know, we might do something like split off the video into a separate show and then resume the audio. But both of them, well, having the same name for both of them wouldn't work. I discovered that I have a video show on iTunes called Podcasting Video Tips. It was originally called The Audacity to Podcast Video. And I realized that makes it just seem like it's the exact same content, just in video form. So now it's Podcasting Video Tips from The Audacity to Podcast.
Rob Greenlee said that works as well. So he gives his approval. That will also work. And I think Daniel came up with a new show in the chat room, Leprechaun with a Gun. So you can team up with Kenn, and I'll listen and tell you what I like and don't like. Craig said in the chat, he says, I'm confused. He says, if I only change my show title in Libsyn settings, then that would adjust automatically in iTunes, and I wouldn't need to redirect, right?
Assuming you're using Libsyn to go to iTunes, it's always number one, what is iTunes looking at? So if you're using PowerPress and you change Libsyn, iTunes is not looking at that. So first you have to know, and I'm amazed at how many people don't know what they submitted to iTunes because they did it so long ago. You kind of need to know your RSS feed. We all know the iTunes thing, but that's a good one to have written down somewhere. But yeah,
and FeedBurner. If you're doing FeedBurner, know what FeedBurner's looking at.
Yeah, exactly. And so whatever iTunes is looking at, if you change that, and then here's the fun: 24 to 48 hours, maybe it should update, depending on how.
Have patience. Don't tweet me about it. Don't send emails. Don't freak out. It'll update, right?
Yeah. So
iTunes can be slow. What else do we think of when we think of rebranding? I mean, we've talked about some technical implications of rebranding. So we've talked about sort of the hardcore geeky stuff. Go ahead, Dave.
Do we hit new hosts? I mean, Music Radio Creative. It's those stupid kids again, messing up the place. So Mike and Isabella had a beautiful little baby, and Kyron. Am I getting that right?
Karen.
Kyron, yeah, he's the new host. He's taken over for them. He took it over.
Like me now.
Yeah. And then Mike Hyatt, of course, brought on. It's weird because This Is Your Life, and then like Michael Hyatt's like a subtitle now. It's like hosted by so and so. Oh yeah, and it's Michael Hyatt too. It's like, well, it's his show, but he's now he's kind of like the co-host. He's the full-time guest of the show.
Another popular example, I would say, is Startup. So Startup is the podcast about the podcasting company. Alex Bloomberg started up. It's season 2. It became really big, partly because it just had an engine behind it and a team and an outlet to push it. But it became really big. It was really good. I enjoyed the first season. We're talking about seasons. The second one is they're looking at a different startup, not their own, and he is starting on it. But really, it's been shifted over to a female who works there. It's now she's going to host. So there is this interesting concept of either bringing on co-hosts or switching hosts altogether. Daniel, what were you going to say?
There's another podcast that's been kind of like that thing where one person's face is on it, and that's the Dave Ramsey Entree Leadership podcast, which actually, yes, it's from Dave Ramsey's organization, but Dave Ramsey is not actually the host. He's the occasional guest, but it has his name and branding associated with it. That's not really a rebranding, but they have changed hosts too. And there was a TV show fan podcast that I followed for a little while that in their first season, let's all be honest, they were horrible, and they knew it. And all the iTunes reviews for the show were horrible, and the company that ran this podcast was going to shut it down. But then one of those hosts said, no, wait, let's redo this. Let's get new hosts in here. They did that, and then they came back much stronger, and they have a much better show for it. But it's basically like a whole new cast. Kind of like Airwolf did, but Airwolf got worse after that point.
That's the helicopter that was smart. It was the Knight Rider of helicopters.
Well, it didn't even talk. It was just a cool helicopter.
I didn't realize when I was talking to Mignon Fogarty at NMX that they have gone through different hosts, but the quick and dirty tips, there's always just that cartoon of the host, which in many cases it turns out doesn't look like the host at all, and so all you hear is your voice, and you replace a female voice with another female voice. You know, I'm just the nutrition diva or whoever. I'm not sure. I'm saying she wasn't the one that changed, but there was somebody over there, and she said, yeah, in some cases, and it's not that people are getting fired. They just go, man, I've been the on fire guy for 3 years. I'm tired of this, and they just bring in another, whatever.
Yeah, podcasting is tough. I mean, at work, we had a couple different science writers do a show where they interviewed other scientists in our niche, and it's called Meet the Scientist. It's under the umbrella of microbiology, but after about a year, I mean, they didn't come to podcasting. We kind of went to them, and then they thought that was cool, but then they find out how much work it really is. So we had to switch hosts a couple different times, and that could have an effect on the audience. I'm curious what you guys think about that, because a lot of times I'll say that people will find your show because of the content, but they may stay because of you, right? So, I mean, look at the example here. You've got myself, Dave, and Daniel all have shows about how to podcast. And then there's this show, which I claim is not a how to podcast show, but there's a lot of shows like ours out there. So why does one person listen to Dave over me? I mean, they just might like Binky and the Wiz, right? So if we switch that on them, if Dave now brings in somebody else to do his show, I mean, what do you guys think about that? I mean, that's we talk about how intimate podcasting is. We talk about how there's this just a crazy connection that the audience feels like they know you. They do know you. They know a little bit more about you than they would know about you if you did a blog. I mean, they hear your voice right in their ears. Ken, you're shaking your head, right? So what do you think?
That's totally it. Branding is who and what. And if you change it, you just rebranded it. You can change the artwork, you can change the feed, but if you change the person, you've rebranded. And I will leave a podcast in a heartbeat if it's not the guy or the girl I've been trying to listen to forever, because they're my friend. And I say that all the time. That's why I couldn't get rid of my 2,000 people. They were like, where did my friend and brother from another mother go? It's like, I'm right here, dude. I'm right here. I'm back.
An example that reminds me of an example that I really kind of ditched. Tech News Today on the Twit Network used to be hosted by Tom Merritt, and when Tom Merritt left Twit, there was debatable reasons as to why that happened, and they put in a new host, and I don't even think I probably gave it a fair shot.
I did the same thing.
I was just going, I really like Tom. That said, here's the interesting thing, is Tom went and started the same show called the Daily Tech News Show. It's in my podcatcher. I don't listen to it anymore. It kind of killed the whole thing for me. I don't know why.
Same.
It just killed it all for me. I really can't explain it. It may have been that I filled that time with another show in that time where the transition was happening.
Yeah, and Ken said it's the who and it's the what. Jillian Michaels, at the end of the year, and again, for reasons unknown, her producer left, who she's had for 9 years. And now you tune into the Jillian Michaels show and you're expecting to hear about health and fitness and things like that. And instead, you're hearing about her kids and her pet pig and it sounds a lot like The View. She has a lot of assistants now, and like her entourage now is on the podcast, and you're not learning anything about health and fitness. And I just did a Google search on where is Janice from the Jillian Michaels show, and they're just forums just filled with what the heck is wrong with this show? Where's Janice? And the general consensus is she had to leave because her parents were getting ill. But the who is still there, still Jillian Michaels, but the what is all over the place.
So my question is, I mean, in general, and I can see from the chat, like this is not a welcome change, right? So what do? You kind of say, I've got this great show, I've built this great brand, but I'm out of here for whatever reason. I had a baby, I got a new job, I'm tired of it, I don't bring the passion, someone else can bring it. But do you shut it down and let that other person start a new show and tell that audience, hey, I'm going to go, it's going to be picked up? I mean, in those cases, people are just afraid of losing that channel, right? That channel has become so powerful that they then just insert something else into it. And do they kind of ruin what they've built up at that point? What do you think, what were you doing with that? I mean, WTF, right? If we take another comedian, we stick in the place of Mark Maron, I mean.
Wouldn't be the same.
I think it comes down to, for the podcaster, thought of numbers versus relevance. Because there is that huge temptation of, I want to rebrand, I want to basically start this new show. That's the extreme end of rebranding, is where you're basically starting a new show. And so you're thinking, I want to start this new show, but I don't want to lose this audience I have. That's when you're focusing on the numbers. But when you launch the new show separately and you tell your audience, I'm launching this new thing, I'm shutting down this thing I'm currently doing, this is going to be the last episode, or the last episode is coming up, whatever. And then you tell them, I'm launching this new thing, it's about this, I'd love for you to join me over there too. Then that's about relevance. Yes, you'll start out with a much smaller number with that new launch, but that will be a much more relevant, passionate, engaged number than if you force the new content down everyone's throats, and then people are going to start leaving you because it's no longer relevant.
Would you put new episodes, first 2, first 3, into that old feed just to say, here's what's going to be happening, and then those 3 episodes also have their call out, hey, move on over. I'm going to shut down this feed, but give them a preview of what what you're bringing. I don't know.
I like the idea of a preview. I'm not sure I would put entire episodes in the feed. Maybe like a short excerpt, like a clamor amount of information in there. Something that gives them an idea of what's on this other show, or just outright tell them, here's what's in this new show, or play a promo. If I have a promo for the other show, play that. But I think it's more important to make it relevant to my current audience, not just to say, this is what you get, go subscribe, but to actually tell them, this is why I think you would like this. This is why I'm going to start this other show. That's my thought.
I tried that, actually, and I had a show that I ran out of topics. I ran out of content, and I thought I'll just keep the feed, and I'll give it to my son. Let my son start this new podcast, totally different, and there's about 400 people over here. Maybe some more stay. It took about a week, and they were like, what the? They were gone. But my son was all hurt. He was like, nobody's listening to me. I was like, because they were my audience, and that's not yours. So you got to build your own. So it was like a learning curve that I didn't realize.
And the danger is that that's the story they now tell and remember, right?
Yeah.
They're like, his kid took over, and he was like yelling into the mic, and it did not end well. Nothing against your kid. I'm sure he has a great show of his own, but
well, I have that moment when I forced another podcast to rebrand, and I overnight septupled my own audience, and that was when I acquired the domain of a similar podcaster, and I knew their XML address, and so I made it forward over to my address. But then I made a welcome message to explain, here's why you're receiving this podcast, in case you're wondering. And I said that for the next several episodes. I said, welcome to our new listeners from such and such podcast. Literally, overnight, my audience septupled, but then dropped down within a couple months, as I think a lot of people were questioning it. But the number never went below double what I had before I acquired that other domain. So people did stick around, but it was that kind of a rebrand. It was a different flavor of clean comedy, and bring them over to my flavor of clean
It's a
comedy.
little gray area there, I would say.
Yeah.
That's if you want, it would have been cool to have buy-in from the other show. That would have been awesome if they could have said, "Hey, meet Daniel taking over the feed." That would have been awesome.
That would have been awesome, but they were completely gone, and
Yeah.
that's how I got the domain.
Well, that's what I would do if I was passing the baton to somebody else. That somebody said, "Hey, I see you've pod-faded your show. I would love to pick it up and go with it. Will you sell me your domain or give it or whatever?" Then I might try to do a month of shows with that person and kind of bring them on, and then have the last show and okay, now it's your baby. Have fun. Just to let the audience know, and they're getting to know the new host along with you. And when you hopefully give them a thumbs up, then so does your audience.
That's a great idea.
What about when you start a podcast and 10 episodes in, you say, "Wow, I've gotten better in 10 episodes, and those first 10 really suck. I'm just going to start over." Right? I think there are examples of that. I actually, Cliff wasn't able to be with us today, but I think, didn't he have some example like that where he just started over? You guys remember that? I don't know the story.
Started over, like from episode 1. I don't know. His Pursuing a Balanced Life podcast used to be called My Crazy Life, and it was changing in its approach. And after 400 episodes, he rebranded it, but kept the numbering the same. So then it was Pursuing a Balanced Life, episode 400 or 300, whatever the number was.
Yeah, I feel like I heard someone talk about before, but just like, hey, go ahead and don't be, maybe even Daniel, maybe even talked about something about that. Like, don't be afraid to sort of start over. I mean, what if I'm talking about like sort of re-recording those 10 episodes, and maybe maybe it's just you want to make those episodes better. Maybe it's that you found the topic within the 10 episodes.
Oh, I think it was a past roundtabler. I can't remember whom.
I don't know.
But it was someone who said that they interviewed someone on their entrepreneur podcast, and that person's business had completely failed. So they brought that person back on their podcast later to talk about the failure, but they were wondering, what do I do with that first episode, since everything he said basically led to his failure. So I think our conclusion then was, well, that's still a great part of history. Maybe there's still some lessons that can be learned from that, but maybe you could go back and record an intro just to say, hey, this is the episode as it was originally recorded, but there's new stuff about this, such and such happened, so go listen to the new episode. I've thought about doing that for some of my first few episodes, because some of them, I'm embarrassed by some of my first few.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, is you can't get better till you actually start putting those out there, and then you realize when you look back, you're like, oh, those can be painful. I like to leave mine in, but mine's a how-to podcast show. So the whole point is, look, even someone who's achieved something with their show, who I would personally consider my own personal success, like, it was not pretty in the beginning necessarily, right? So go look at that and use that as motivation to start. In our genre or our niche of how-to podcasting, some people will go back and they'll start at episode 1, and a lot of times I tell people, listen in the reverse order, because the newest stuff, I'm going to tell you, hey, FeedBurner, don't do that anymore. And if you start from the beginning, you're going to get information like, hey, go to FeedBurner. It's an awesome service. Sign up. It's great. It's going to be there forever. It may be. Don't jump on me. And it may actually be there forever. But you know what I'm talking about. So I try to refresh that sort of information every 25, 50 episodes, whatever it is, to sort of update it and say, hey, start here. I would probably benefit from going back to those first few episodes and inserting something for those new people. Because, Dave, I mean, you know, people will binge listen, right? They'll go back and listen to your entire catalog when they find you.
Yeah, I had I think I've only taken down one episode, and it's because the majority of the episode I was interviewing a guy from a company called Innertube. It was INNERTOOB, and it was basically SoundCloud about 5 years before SoundCloud. You could actually leave comments on a timeline, and it was really cool at the time, and it was this whole thing about interacting with your audience, and it came out, and just everybody kind of went, yeah, because you had to do it on a website, and that's when everybody was on the iPod. It's like, I can't see the Innertube on an iPod, so it came out and failed miserably. And so that was an episode that I was like, this really has no value, pretty much, besides, you know, wow, listen to how weird Dave's voice sounds at the time. You know, there wasn't a whole lot of value, so I pulled that one off the feed. But pretty much everything else I've kept up there.
Yeah, I mean, Joshua, as we're going along, any things strike a chord or any thoughts come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of echo some of the things that were said as far as starting a new podcast with a new feed, new domain, all that kind of stuff, and then just maybe just having snippets for the new stuff on the old feed. That's probably, like I said, that's probably what I should have done with my case. And so, because it was similar content, the content isn't vastly different. It's just I was trying to have a different focus and a different look, and different things like that, and trying to, and I was bring it back to my name domain as opposed to a brand name. And so I was trying to bring it back to that. And so I probably should have started a new one, and made a clean break with that, and then just had some snippets for a month or so, saying, "Hey, just remember, I'm not doing this podcast anymore. I'm starting this one over here. Here's where you go to be able to get that." And so I wish I would have done it that way for myself, because I mean, doing it this way, I lost 20% of my audience. I don't have the new and noteworthy things. I know that it's not the greatest thing, but I mean, it helps. And so I could have had maybe a little bit extra boost.
I mean, so does it actually help? Like, that was one of the things, Rob, he loves to rant about that. And he'll tell you that it's highly, highly overrated. And we heard at his talk that some people will completely start over just to get in new and noteworthy. Did you guys, Dave, were you in that talk?
Yeah, I've heard of people doing that. They will literally rebrand. You know, it's the same stuff, same content, but they'll do something to get a new...
Are we talking about deleting yourself out of iTunes and starting over?
I believe so.
Just to get in the new and what they think is going to put them in new and noteworthy, even though they could still be in new and noteworthy with the show that they've now deleted.
Because they've heard, you know, over and over and over, you only have 8 weeks to get in new and noteworthy, and that's just not true. You have 8 weeks to get in as new, but you can be noteworthy anytime you want.
And that really, I mean, Daniel, haven't we seen that being a new noteworthy, yeah, while you're there, maybe some extra attention. Maybe you scrape 1 or 2 extra visitors, though, but it's not worth killing yourself over because, I mean, you've seen the spikes, right? Up and down.
Right. Yeah, and there are many things, though, that it's different for everyone, but the main thing is the best thing you can do to help yourself is always create great content. And if you're doing that when you're featured, and in every episode, you're always asking people, after you provide them great value, you're asking them to subscribe, rate, and review, and all that important stuff, a simple call to action that they can take to stay connected. If you're doing that in every single episode, then your success in new and noteworthy is going to be better. But if you're just putting out regular content, then when you're in new and noteworthy, it's not going to help you as much.
Yeah. Well, so JD Sutter, he says he's been through several rebrands over the last few years, and a couple pointers he put in the chat. Thanks, JD, for taking the time to do that. He says, number one, ask yourself why you want to rebrand. I think, Dave, you mentioned that, right? Is it a change of focus? Is it bad branding in the first place? Did you discover another brand that was too similar to yours, which is an interesting topic, right? Because almost most of us, when we start a podcast in the niche, there's other podcasts in that niche out there, right? And so you don't need to rebrand necessarily as so much as differentiate yourself. Or maybe your voice is different. Yeah. And I don't mean like you sound different than I do, but you have something different to say on the same topic, right? What'd you say, Ken?
It's remodeling. I mean, it's still you. You're not really changing. You're just fixing up what's broken and kind of changing the panes on the windows and stuff. It's still you, though. Still your house.
Yeah, he says, decide what you want your new brand to convey to someone who hears or sees it for the first time. Also, keep in mind what your goals are for the brand. Research, strategize, contemplate as you work through choosing a new name. Don't just jump for the first thing that pops in your head. He says, don't rush, but don't drag your feet either. He said, check for matching or similar domain names, right? I mean, you could be changing your brand and stepping into something where you're just lost, buried by another brand that is much stronger than your own. Not that you couldn't compete, but you could be creating an uphill battle for yourself, I guess. He says, crowdsource the process by getting feedback from your existing audience and or network, all while keeping the focus, the message, and the goal of the brand you're creating. So He also says bounce it off of your family and friends, and you come up with this new brand and a couple different options. So get feedback before you just jump in there, right? I mean, Dave, I think I always use a tip that you gave one time where if you're trying to come up with a new name for a show and you just go out there and sort of tell people the name, people that don't know you, just tell them the name and ask them, what do you think that's about, right? Which is a great tip. I mean, if I say Podcasters Roundtable, I'm curious what the person on the street, what is that about? That's a good test. And maybe it's oftentimes tests that I don't want to put to my content. I'm like, I found a name. I am not trying to monetize this thing. I'm going to go with it. And you find out, that's a tough name. I mean, the Podcaster Studio's got a lot of S's in it.
Yeah, the person had a show. He was going to call it After the Darkness. And he asked a couple people, and someone was like, is that one of those new vampire movies? And somebody else said, I think that's a band from the 80s. And I asked him, I go, so tell me again what your podcast is about. And he had developed a disease, and he had gone blind. So he goes, well, it's about my life after blindness. I go, that's the name of your show, Life After Blindness. And I go ask those same people. I'm going to do a podcast called Life After Blindness. What do you think it's about? And they went, Life After Going Blind. And I'm like, there you go.
Yeah. So rebranding can be a tricky thing. I think that Josh, you mentioned having an itchy trigger finger, to relate that to Ken. But yeah, I mean, we get bored of our site pretty quick. You're like, man, I am sick of staring at the same thing. Let's change it all. Or maybe you need a responsive design, right? You have to be mobile now. So that could affect your brand if someone comes to your page. So it could be something like that, whereas you have a brand, you're going to sort of change the look of that brand. Would you guys say that's rebranding? I mean, this topic can mean a lot of things, right?
It's remodeling. And to make sure that you just take your time. Don't get stuck up on numbers. Know that organic growth takes time. And if you do like I do, you get like ADD and you get all spastic about your name, and then you have one for a while and then you lose it, then the Russian mob takes it and you can't get it back, and you're stuck.
Yes, the domain name that you've lost. Goodbye. Kiss it goodbye. Or cough up the money, my friend. Don't get caught in that game. So anyways, as we go out here, I think as usual, we could talk so much more about this one topic. And, if you are listening and you're like, you guys have missed so much, you need to bring that up, because there is nothing against us bringing back topics to the roundtable. We do that. That's fun. And if it's a really good one, which I saw some good response to this, then let's do it again. Let's talk about it, because those are the discussions that we're having as podcast producers. So we want to help each other out with that. All right, so I am going to laughing at Ken's chat. So the private chat, while fun, can be distracting, but Ken is the man, and he's entertaining us even behind the scenes. But we're going to go out here. Oh, wait, hold on. Keep that smile, Ken. What was it? Yeah. That's the thumbnail right there. So here's the thing. If you come on the roundtable, if you join us, someone gets to be the thumbnail. If you go to podcastersroundtable.com, check out all the cover images. I take a little time. I pick them out. I spend too much time staring at your face in slow motion, and I pick out that nice spot. I try to get something where you're doing something goofy, have some fun, right? Draw the viewer in to press play, but we get a nice smile. That usually is good enough for me. And Ken, since he didn't get the thumbnail this time, probably be the cover boy this time. But anyways, we'll go out here. Let us know your one place we can find you, because we know there's rebranding. We rebrand as podcasters all the time. Hey, I've got an idea for a new show. Dave's got 5 ideas for new shows, right? So there's a lot of brands usually wrapped into one brand, which is you. Oftentimes, the brand we're building is like your name. That's an interesting one. We can go there later, but the brand could just be you. So and I think Josh might have talked a little bit about that, about going to his domain name. So if you can get your own domain name, get it. But anyways, I won't digress. One place where we can find you, if you have a closing thought, feel free to throw it out there. We're not on a time limit. But otherwise, thanks to the chat for partying with us. Lots of roundtablers that we met in person, or a few. They're in there. So cool to see everyone again, online and in person. Join us. Dave's going to want you out at the next New Media Expo. He's already started planning, I'm sure of it, because Dave's a planner, and it will hopefully avoid some of the frustration and hiccups of this year. And Dave is growing as he goes. So, all right, Dave, good job. Daniel, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. I'm Daniel J. Lewis from the Audacity to Podcast. And despite the fact that I have moved on from Audacity to Audition, it is remaining the Audacity to Podcast because it's always been about the guts, the courage, and such. And I'm going to work to strengthen that aspect of the branding so people stop saying, oh, yeah, I use Audacity all the time when I mention my podcast name.
Yeah, so some issues there, but Daniel dealing with it. I think he's dealing with it okay. I don't know.
Yeah,
We'll see. He's good. Not the award-winning. He's fine. So, all right. Yes, I love Audition too, and but Audacity can get the job done. So lots of stuff going on there. But yes, do you have the Audacity to Podcast? I like it. All right, Dave. Well, I was gonna say welcome back, but Dave couldn't decide if he wanted to be here or if he wanted to leave today. Whatever. Dave slid into the Podcasters Roundtable pool here and there, but he was busy at NMX, so we forgive him. Next year, we're going to expect that you carve out
That's right.
the live show is in Dave's schedule, and you have a year now. You have a year, so thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, I don't care if Dennis Miller is waiting outside. Too bad.
He's not going to show up even if he says
he'll just bail again, scheduling conflict that he's known about for 4 months. Hey, you can find me at schoolofpodcasting.com, where I help you flatten the learning curve of podcasting.
Very cool. And Josh, thanks for joining us for your first roundtable. I always feel like the first roundtable, once a roundtabler, always a roundtabler. You learn how to jump in a little bit more the next time. So we will look forward to having you on again for another topic that you enjoy or that you have something to offer. I mean, so many of you roundtablers have so much to offer that you can come into many different roundtables. But thanks again for joining us for your first roundtable.
Yeah, I need to schedule the other 9 so I can be able to get that T-shirt that
yeah.
you mentioned, which we went the entire episode and it never got mentioned till now, so I figured it needed to get his presence on here. You can find me, joshuarivers.net. Unfortunately, I couldn't get .com, so somebody swiped that before me, but joshuarivers.net. And so that, same podcast, you can go to thesuccessroad.com, good directs to the same place, and so you can be able to get that podcast. I have another one as well, but there'll be links. You can get my information there. So
cool. Yeah, way to get 2 domains in for the price of 1 because they go to the same place. So you come from the D. Well, it's not Daniel J. Lewis anymore. Who are you now, Daniel? You've rebranded.
Sitwell.
Yes. I don't even know how to repeat that.
You'll just have to think about it. Spell it out and think about it.
I'm going to pass. I feel something. I feel the setup. But yes, anyways, the Daniel J. Lewis School of Marketing. Good job. All right.
Yes.
Ken, thanks for joining us once again on the Roundtable.
Man, it's my pleasure. You can find me on the web as the Black Man with a Gun. That's my trademark name, but my main site now is blanchard.media.
All right. That's it. Roundtable, Podcasters Roundtable 50. Congrats, as I said in the beginning. That's been very cool. 50 more, and then maybe we'll rebrand. Maybe we'll become the internet, or maybe we'll become the the Netcaster Roundtable. I don't think so. All right, you guys. Yeah. Thanks to the chat. Thanks to everyone who tuned in and the archive, of course. This is an audio-only podcast. So if you are listening on the audio only, go check out the video. You don't have to. But if you're watching the video, check out the archive of the audio. It's a podcast. Subscribe. We want to be in the feed every week or every other week. All right, I will stop talking. We'll see you next time. Wave goodbye, everybody.